Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And in this case, I kind of feel like this is a subject that our guest and I have been talking about a bunch over maybe years now, Norma. That's kind of crazy to think that. For those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And I first met Norma, or maybe I should say Dr. Padron, because she was exploring from a vantage point from the healthcare industry, a lot of data science related questions. And today she is the CEO and founder of EmpiricaLab, which I'll let her talk about, but learning technology focused on the healthcare industry. You can correct me if I got any of that wrong. And so the question that we have today, which I kind of feel like your story is a great living example of this, is I want to stay in my same industry, but I just want a different job. And so how do I go about exploring what different job I want? And thank you, Norma. It's kind of fun to get to do this with a pal.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. So I think that the best way to approach it is that it is okay to be optimizing for whatever it is that you're optimizing, but you should be asking what you're optimizing for. So at different points in your life, you're going to be optimizing for more money, or you might be optimizing for a specific type of lifestyle. You may need to work remotely or in a different city or in a different country. Or you may be optimizing because you want a new experience, a new skill. You're expanding something. Sometimes, you might be optimizing for two at a time or something, but you should be asking yourself what you're optimizing for. Once you kind of figure that out, then the problem becomes a little bit more narrow and like, what are the competencies? What are the skills? What are the types of tools that would get me the roles that would get me to what I'm optimizing for? As you know, I've been in healthcare for 13 years now, which is insane to even say out loud, but I'm not a medical doctor. Right. And so, but I always knew that I wanted to work in healthcare. I have a personal story about growing up without health insurance in one of the towns with some of the highest uninsured rates in the country. And so I knew that I wanted to work in healthcare. I just didn't know, I just didn't know how. So I think that my story is a little bit of like at different times I've been optimizing because I needed more money. Different times I was optimizing because I needed to move cities or change, lifestyle. And then at some others is about the skill and the experience. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think about there, I call this the objective function in a career. And a very frequent thing that will happen to me is somebody will come to me looking for career advice. And I've written a little bit about this, and maybe I'll link to one of these posts. And they'll say something that's like, should I do job X or should I do job Y? And they compare the two options in front of them, and they do pros and cons. We all know how to do pros and cons. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But unless I know what your basis is for making a decision, it's hard to know. And sometimes I think what happens in a pro-con comparison is it comes out of that. But why not just start with that? And this thing is hard to know. And the way I think of it is you can optimize for one thing. You can optimize for more than one thing if you want, but it's just harder. But optimize for one thing because the math gets tricky. And you can have as many constraints as you want. Like, I need a job where I can, be there to care for my ailing grandmother whenever she needs me to, at the last minute, drop everything and come home. Okay, you have that as a constraint. And what I'm optimizing for is fastest rate of learning, or most amount of money I can make within the next 2 years. Something like that. And I'm curious, as you've now moved within different jobs in the healthcare industry, if you had to go back and say to yourself, okay, here's what I should have been optimizing for. How do you think about, like, what are the right things to optimize for as you move through your career?
Yeah. So you touch a little bit into something that I love. By the way, everyone should know Annie Duke. So she speaks a lot about resulting, right? This concept of like, you evaluate a decision process based on the outcome without sort of acknowledging that there's luck. I would add that specifically when you're thinking about, career journeys right now, I think that they're fascinating in that, as tenure employment basically is shorter now. We transition from one employment to the other, right? And so these decisions are in terminal decisions, right? And so I think that this is something that should take off the weight from the decision. And so you should, feel yourself a little bit more comfortable making these decisions. The one thing that I will say that I think people don't speak a lot about when you're making these career decisions or maybe comparing A and B is what is not here in this choice set.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly. That's a
right,
perfect
like,
way to
why
put.
am I missing?
That's
And
a
I
consequence of the X versus Y comparison is if you don't know what you're solving for, well, then you can't be creative and think, oh, but what I really could do is blank. But sorry, I interrupted you.
no, this is great. I think that so one thing to consider, and I do kind of want to encourage, because it happened to me, is that sometimes we don't even know that some things are available to us or they're possible to us. And it happens with women often. We just don't see any women in specific types of roles. And so we're like, well, maybe this is just not available to me. Or for example, like when I started my PhD, like I would have to ask permission to use the servers to run some regressions that I was running. By the time I finished, I could run them in my laptop. So I also didn't know precisely at what pace the technology would move, right? Like I didn't know that I was going to become so interested in data and data analytics, right? And so I think like you should kind of be aware of what might not be there and just leave it open for that. So that's why then going back to the core, like what are you optimizing for, would at least allow you to make a better kind of like decision process. But you're gonna kind of keep a little bit of an open mind. Career professionally wise, I think that's the best advice or tip that I can give is that you should always keep a look and like taking the pulse and where the industry is going, right? There's some things that are, I don't know, they might not be kind of like they're spoken about today, but you can see where the trends are going. I mean, population health for me was one where I kind of knew that that was a space that I could be interested in the future. But I didn't, it took me a while to kind of even gain the skills to understand what it was.
Yeah, I think that that whole thing of the industry perspective, oftentimes people leave out. And then the last thing I just want to say is you are kind of the living example of this, of optimizing for learning along the way. And, for as long as I've known you, you've been learning throughout. I don't even know how many degrees you have. And then you bringing up the Annie Duke book and stuff like that. Now, obviously, you're providing that to others for a living. And so sometimes the thing you're optimizing for is just, I don't know if I would like this. And I just need the data. I'm optimizing for look, I look at my own career. I've worked in government, nonprofit, professional services, big company, media, starting a company, now as an investor. I hope I didn't leave. Oh, academia. God, there's a lot. And for a lot of it was short tours of duty in the beginning because I was just trying to figure out where would I enjoy things. And now I'm fortunate to have landed here. All right, Norma, anything else you want to leave people with before we wrap?
Ask yourselves about what you're bringing as well to what can you contribute? What are you ripe to start bringing to the table, right? I obviously at EmpiricaLab, we care a lot about tapping into internal experts in organizations. And so it's sort of like, what are you an internal expert on? And that can be a little bit intimidating. But once you start asking yourself those questions, you're like, well, actually, I could teach my colleagues about this, or I can bring about this, folks don't know about, or this new skill or things. And so I think
there's this concept that I'd heard about years ago, but that a guy on Twitter, Dario Basanjo from Meta, I think brought it up, of ikigai, which is this idea of like the four-way intersection, and I think it's a Japanese concept of like what the world needs, what you enjoy, what you are good at, what you can bring, and then what you can be compensated, what you can be paid to do. And when those things come together, you kind of have this magical moment, which I feel very fortunate.
Well, and you shouldn't underestimate that there's a lot of reward, there's a lot of value into what you bring to the table. And so that in itself is something you can optimize and should optimize.
Yeah, the only thing I just want to say about that is I think that particularly for people who have done well in school, my sense is that they sometimes enter into this fallacy of reasoning from past experience, in the sense of what would it make sense for someone in my background to do? Given what I've done, what should I do? And it's like, well, the world isn't really keeping track. They don't really care, that kind of thing. And so if folks want to know more, especially if they're in healthcare and can be students, that's the right URL, correct? EmpiricaLab.com?
Correct.
Awesome. And then I just say, if you want more of these questions, you can find the repository of all the past ones in our reference guide of how to work, which is thisisnotadvice.work. And if you prefer listening, I'm biased because I'm an investor, but you can go to jam.ai, and then you can find This Is Not Advice there. You don't have to write down that whole URL and get once a week a little bit. And Norma, this session will show up there. And then we get our questions from all of you out there. So please feel free to ask them. And maybe I should go chase down Daria to go talk about Ikigai. I don't even know him, but get him on here. Okay, cool. Thank you, Norma. To be continued.
To be continued. Bye-bye.